I want to welcome everyone to the Startup Bootcamp from the Blackstone Launchpad and Techstars here at UC Riverside. And this is the second part of our 5-part series. And last week we talked about customer discovery and interviewing. And tonight, or this afternoon, we're going to have Steve Sharp, one of the EIRs at UC Riverside. He'll be speaking to us about marketing and the go-to-market planning. And Steve is a wonderful speaker, and he's got a lot of information. This will be an information-packed session. Next week, we have Connor Lynch and maybe also Sean Lynch speaking on company formation and intellectual property. So they have an intellectual property law firm that's based in Southern California, and they'll be speaking to us. And in the chat box, I believe that our intern, Margarita, has given information on how to reach Ankita. Ankita is in charge of the social innovation program of the UCs, and that's called the Big Ideas Contest. And we encourage everyone who's got a big idea to apply for that. So because we have a lot of information, I'd like to turn things over to Steve. Steve, thanks again for agreeing to speak to our group. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. And I know that people are going to learn a lot. So Steve, why don't you take over and let us know how you want to structure your presentation in terms of listening and talking.
Yeah, and are we recording now, Jay?
Yes, we're recording now. You're
Great.
on.
So yeah, it might be better if you have questions, write them down and perhaps hold them to the end. So we've got a bit of ground to cover, but we'll allow about 10 or 15 minutes, perhaps even more at the end for questions, and happy to take any and all of those at that time. So thank you, Jay. Hopefully you've had a chance to be at Jay's excellent first workshop on market discovery. And I know at least a couple of you are involved in the ICOR and Innovar curriculum, so you'll know a bit about that. A little bit about me. I've been about 40 years in business as senior executive, consultant, and board member. That just means I've made a lot of mistakes, advise others who've made mistakes, and learn from these because I've been on earth a long time. And as we talk about in the Innovar curriculum, we want to fail fast and fail early because earlier mistakes are better than later mistakes when you're starting up a business. So I've made a lot of them and recovered from them. And accordingly, that perhaps equips me to have some helpful perspectives. I mentor teams here at UC Riverside, both SBDC, which are small business development clients, as well as participants in UCR's Innovar and ICOR program. So I'm happy to join you today and excited about today's topic. So the question is, are you an entrepreneur, and what are some of the alternatives? This is really the entire context is you've done market discovery. Now, what do you do if you want to start a business up? That's kind of the theme for today's business. And as you've already hopefully been part of Jay's curriculum, the first workshop, or you've experienced that through the ICOR Innovar program, we're going to talk a little bit about what are you an entrepreneur, and are there some alternatives to that? That's where we'll start, and then we'll get into some of the other content from this. So an entrepreneur is really just someone who has an idea and is willing to risk loss in order to make money. There's really kind of a couple of general types. There's the kind of sales-oriented types, or the technical types, Bill Gates famously, or sales types, Steve Jobs. And as you can see from the slide, very high risk tolerance, so consumed with their idea that they'll bet everything on it, typically. Always ready to talk to anybody that's relevant to their idea at any time and any circumstances. So very, very consumed and passionate about that idea. Don't see things necessarily the way everybody else does. That's what makes them an entrepreneur and an innovator. So someone who likes to paint outside the lines, as we say, might have a challenge working for others, kind of has a need to be the boss and run things oftentimes, and might struggle if may not be a classical corporate animal that can work comfortably for others, likes to do things, likes to lead, doesn't always love managing because managing is a little bit more mundane. I'm really a manager, although I'm called an entrepreneur in residence. So I'm about how do things work well? How do you make them scalable, repeatable, transferable? Entrepreneurs usually like to see strategy and big picture and have a vision. And then they also like to do stuff themselves. But the management stuff that happens in between those is usually not necessarily their forte. nor their passion. So usually a great entrepreneur needs to bring managers in to make sure things reduce to practice and get executed well. And they like new things, love new stuff. The routine can be boring. They can be restless. Sometimes they have short attention spans. So if these are combinations of these kind of sound like you might be an entrepreneur. But there are alternatives to being an entrepreneur, or ways that an entrepreneur can mitigate some of their risk in starting out in business. Frequently, somebody who's an aspiring entrepreneur, or might even be one, sometimes they start with a more large established company. I can work in a big company to kind of learn about it, and somebody else is sort of paying me to do that. And often we'll do that for a season, for a few years, and then say, okay, now I know enough about business or how things work that I'm ready to launch out on my own. And that's one avenue. I mean, some entrepreneurs have such an itch that they've got to start with a business, and they even start when they're maybe in their teenage years or early in their 20s. That happens. And many successful entrepreneurs have started that way. But others might say, let me learn a little bit about this business before I start out and put my funds at risk and put my life on hold to run this company. So one way is to kind of start out in somebody else's business on their dime. That can either be in an established business, or it can be in a startup. Again, many entrepreneurs go with startups so they can learn the entrepreneurial ropes, as the second bullet says. If you're a technical entrepreneur, and again, we talked about there are two main types. There are kind of the sales-oriented, business development-oriented entrepreneurs, Steve Jobs types, or there's the more technical types, like Bill Gates way back when. And again, they sort of tend together over time. If you've been a successful entrepreneur for years, even if you started out as more sales-oriented or more technical, you kind of grow into both over time. But ultimately, you default to that kind of native tongue. But let's say you're technical, and you're more of a product development type person, more of an engineering type. Frequently, you can start a business, but you might bring in somebody who's more sales and business development oriented to actually be the CEO. So you'll stay involved in the startup, perhaps, in the new business, but you might have somebody else running it while you focus on the technical development efforts. And that's a very meaningful and reasonable path for technical entrepreneurs as well. They might say, hey, you work in the lab and develop all the great new products, and we'll fit them into the greater business, and that's fine. Or you might be a serial inventor. Your business might be inventing stuff, and you spin it out by licensing it to others. And there's entrepreneurs and businesses, and we've spawned several of them through UC Riverside, whose business is just to invent new things and license them and kick them out to others. And that's another potentially reasonable business avenue to pursue. Or you can start out and do one of these things for some period of time, and then eventually you might want to consult to startups. If you're a type that says, I can't really be a corporate animal, but I've learned a lot about this, and I want to help others who are kind of wired the way I am. So again, that's kind of gives you a bit of an idea. Now, again, you've got some entrepreneurs that are sort of bilingual. They might be technical and sales and business oriented. Elon Musk is an example as an example now with his startup with Tesla. He's kind of a little bit both. He's sort of started out technical, but he's also got a business development aim to him. So again, there's not a one size fits all. There's kind of a continuum here. But the attributes we talked about on the prior slide really kind of typically characterize the types of entrepreneurs that are out there. So what are some of the areas that typically follow after you've done discovery? Here's kind of a flow. And Jay and I actually put this together for another workshop that we did as part of the other curriculum that UC Riverside develops. But typically, as we've talked about, it starts with market discovery. That's the first step in everything. What are those customer needs and pain points that are compromising, that are not well met? And for those of you that are involved with the Innovar program, that's the emphasis of Innovar. Do that discovery, understand where the pain is, and then think about solutions and business models that can address those pain points in a profitable fashion. Usually then your discovery then can inform how you want to innovate, what types of products, services, et cetera, you can do better than others, and you can in turn make money at to create a business that's sustainable. The innovation then that kind of determines what strategy you use. And we'll talk about strategy a little bit today. Innovation is going to be a bit beyond the scope of today, and you're all doing that already. But strategy we'll talk about a little bit and talk about some of the common strategies, the generic strategies that prevail. But strategy is really what's that means? What's that method that's very simply stated that moves me toward my long-term goal? One of the famous examples is Gillette's razor blades. They were in the razor blades business. They gave away razors to sell blades. So we'll talk about some of those standard generic strategies in a few minutes. The business model. what is the operational methods you use? How do you organize amongst the various functions in a business, the roles, to realize the strategy, meet customer needs, and sustainably and profitably address the compromises that you're addressing, those undermet needs that customers experience today that you're going to address explicitly with your product and services. And then what's the go-to-market strategy? That's the part of the strategy that focus operationally upon creating demand, supporting customers, and sustaining your business effectively. And then the subset of go-to-market, marketing, sales, and business development. We won't get into those in as much detail today, but those are fairly classically understood. Business development's a little bit different that's a subset of sales. In sales, you typically have account managers that manage today's business. The business development people are focused upon new business. So there's two different types of profiles in sales. We'll touch upon those a little bit as we go in. And I think, Jay, we'll have this presentation posted and available, I think, to participants, or we can email it to them, I presume, subsequent to to today's workshop.
Yes, that is correct.
Great. So you'll have all this. So if you're furiously writing notes, I apologize. I talk fast. I try to slow myself down, but we'll have all this available to you as well. So let's talk a little bit about strategy and business and innovation and strategy. There's a continuum or history of it that I think is interesting. And I think Jay would agree with me there, because I find it helpful to know where have you been and what are the meta themes and trends that drive today's activities, so you can kind of get a sense of how does that shape and form businesses as we know them today. So if you go back to the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s, I know that was a long time ago, even before I was born, back when dinosaurs ruled the earth. Back then, things were so rudimentary that really what business was about was making life tolerable, so people could just live and not die prematurely of diseases or mishaps and so on. And there were somewhere between 1 and 1.5 billion people on Earth back then. The environment was viewed as unlimited. It was an analog world. Retail was just beginning to emerge. And everything then was about high volume and efficiency. Henry Ford in the late 1800s with the first Model T. You could have any color you want as long as it's black. So it was all a high volume scale, production driven model. And the theme was, from an innovation point of view, if you build it, they will come. A little bit like Field of Dreams. And that was true back then during that Industrial Revolution. Just having a great idea was sufficient to be successful, because this was a time when innovation was new. Things were changing. Then you go to the last century, the so-called time of the American dream. And the global population was considerably larger, 3 to 4 times larger than it had been in the 1800s. The theme there was making life easier. A lot of automation, a lot of new things were coming up about. The environment was starting to emerge as something that needs some attention, but not to the level that we see it today. Transistors, electromechanical innovations came on the scene. Mass retail emerged, very retail-centric strategies, pump things through stores, certainly in B2C businesses, but even B2B ultimately was serving a retail-driven environment. And the theme for innovation was high quality and increasing variety. Make more in different shapes and flavors of things. But today, as is the theme of Innovar and ICOR, it's customer driven. We're in the information age, as we all know. Over 7.5 billion people on Earth. People are living longer. They want things that they can get when they get them. So instant gratification. The environment is now understood as being fragile and limited. It's not an unlimited. It's not a renewable resource. It needs to be managed. Smart infrastructure. Mass retail has been rationalized by online alternatives. And the strategy is driven by no user compromises. That's the stuff and theme of ICOR and of Innovar. Find out what those compromises are, those pain points, and develop solutions that address them, and you will have the basis for a successful business. And it's customer driven. Innovation has to be driven by the customer. So that old notion of if you build it, they will come doesn't work. You've got to talk to customers, and that's the emphasis of Jay's first workshop. Talk to them, and they will tell you what they need, and that translates then into great products, services, and thus the basis for a successful business. So here's a tool that can help you sort of figure out, am I approaching a category that has great possibilities? How attractive is the market? Well, obviously, if it's not an attractive market, you shouldn't pursue it further. If it seems attractive, keep going. There's ways to innovate. You can do a Me Too product. You can replicate something that somebody else does, but maybe do it more efficiently, or distribute it in a different way that's better, but you don't necessarily have an innovative solution. Well, if that's true, If you're in a low to moderate growth category and you're doing a Me Too product, sort of replicating what somebody else does, you probably should stop. If you're in a high growth category, an emerging category, you can still make money with a Me Too approach. But you're going to really want to look at those segments that aren't being served well today, or you have to pivot towards something that does find one of those segments that's not being served well today in a high growth emerging category. But every category is not high growth and emerging. If you have an evolutionary product, you're improving on something, not radically, but a little bit better than what others are doing, incumbents are doing, that can be great. But if it's in a low growth area, then you're going to have to try to find those competitors who are very vulnerable and attack them. Your strategy should be find the incumbents that have vulnerable strategies, and your product and business strategy and innovation strategies focus upon where those current competitors aren't doing things well. That's in a low growth type of a market. And again, one of the reasons we emphasize growth in the Innovar and ICOR program is if you're in a high growth area, that's where you want to be ideally. But you can be successful in low growth categories. However, you've got to really focus then on taking share from somebody else. If you're in a moderate and high growth and you have an evolutionary or just an improved product, you want to find a segment, what we call the beachhead, to really focus upon. Or maybe it's yours is a cost reduction emphasis. I can do the same thing or similar thing to somebody else, slightly better, but I can do it much more efficiently. And if you can't do one of those two things, you need to pivot and find a place where you can make money. Again, if you're in an evolutionary type of a category. Revolutionary, innovative. That's where you're changing the game. You're meaningfully changing the game. And that's what we love most, because that's where real innovation happens. That's where you have a disruptive product or solution or services that changes the way competition happens. In that case, you've got a lot more choices strategically. If it is low growth, but it's revolutionary, you can either attack vulnerable competitors, and or you can try to expand the market by approaching new users or new segments, or you can address alternative markets that have been under addressed thus far if the category is low growth. If it's a moderate growth category and you've got a revolutionary, truly innovative product, what kind of intellectual property do you have? If you've got a strong patent position or other trade secrets or heavy intellectual property, you can exploit those to drive success, and you can focus upon operating more efficiently than others with cost reduction strategies. I can serve the market with less cost than others and generate higher margins. Or if you're in a high growth, revolutionary high growth, that's where you want to be. That's the best place to be. Then you have to just worry about having the capacity to support all the demand you'll be creating. So the best place to be, if you can pull it off, is a revolutionary, truly innovative product, high growth category. Then your challenge is having enough capacity to service all the demand that you're going to tap into. And that's a problem that every entrepreneur loves to have. But this just kind of shares with you, again, as you look at the market, what kind of dynamic is it? What kind of innovation are you contemplating? And then what's the fundamental of the market itself, low, medium, or high growth? And then that then sort of dictates sort of a generic strategy or simple approach to business success. So here's some examples of some core business strategies. I talked earlier about razors, razor blades. Gillette was a blades company. They gave the razors away basically to drive blade sales. Well, Avery Dennison did that in office products. They created software to format printable office supplies, gave the software away virtually so they could drive the sales of their consumable supplies. Hewlett-Packard and Canon originally were giving away the printers basically because they wanted to sell ink and toner. So that razor blade strategy has been used in many different areas and by many others in various categories to drive. And you can use that whether it's a B2B, a business to business, or business to consumer. Is there a way with your product you can give something away that's not expensive for you to give away, that will in turn drive what you really want to sell? And that's often done between hardware and consumables, or hardware and software, and those combinations of products. So again, that may or may not be an exploitable generic strategy or part of a strategy for your business. Martial arts. That means going where your competitors are unable or unwilling to go because they're so heavy and committed to certain category, they won't be flexible and nimble. The Japanese automotive companies famously employed this strategy in the 1960s. The big three incumbents in the U.S. didn't really pay a lot of attention to the commodity or the low end of the automobile market. So Toyota and Nissan and others that followed them kind of got into the category, the low end part of the market, the low-end part of the automotive market with smaller, less expensive vehicles. They actually parlayed, starting out in electronic products like mowers and leaf blowers and areas like that, engine-driven appliances. They parlayed that into an entree in the 1960s into the automobile market. And then once they established a beachhead there, they moved up into the more mid-market and ultimately into the more luxury part of the automotive market. And today, they're very strong players in the automotive market. There are companies that have focused upon creating systems and platforms. Microsoft and Apple do that. They have the platform, and then they can sell you the applications that snap onto that platform in a very seamless fashion. So in their case, it's almost like a razor blade. They don't give away the platform, but their ultimate purpose is not only to sell the platform, but sell applications that are compatible with that platform. Bundling, insurance companies, telecommunications companies use that. And if you bundle in your cell phone with your internet, then we'll give you a better deal. Or if your auto insurance with your home insurance, we'll give you a better deal. Bundling strategies are commonly used. Those are really ultimately going for what we call a share of wallet. If I can get the customer to do more with me, then I'll pass along some of the efficiencies and savings to them. But then you also have unbundling strategies, which sort of look at the market and segment it. So like Southwest Airlines and now Spirit Airlines, they go bare bones, basic services. I'm not going to offer you services you may not want to pay for. So they go with a very, very lean, focusing on who their segment is, and they unbundle all the other goods and services that their customers may not care about and offer a low price, bare bones approach. Then there are many that have lifestyle and affinity products. Starbucks recognized that the old corner barbershop where people used to get together and talk about what's the latest news kind of went away in the mid 1900s and in the latter part. But there's still a social need. So Starbucks created an environment where people could get together and congregate and collaborate and talk, even if it's electronically. They kind of supplanted the old corner barbershop with a coffee shop that's wired electronically, that has a network availability. And McDonald's sort of does that too, lifestyle and affinity. For moms or parents or grandparents that have young children and grandchildren, McDonald's is a place where you can go and get good enough food. Kids love it. Adults tend to grow out of it, but it's also a place where the kids can play in the playground and the moms or grandparents can go sit and talk and congregate while the kids are playing. So they're really dealing with a lifestyle and affinity need, and they've created kind of a horizontal relationship amongst their clients that's sort of a sustaining factor in their strategy. There's also an addiction model and affinity model. World of Warcraft was one of the first software products that specifically built in a user interdependency with using the game that sustains it. So somebody who starts doing the World of Warcraft, that Blizzard created that, what they start using World of Warcraft, well, they don't want to stop using it because they've got other people that are engaged in the battle with them that they'd be letting down if they exited out. So that affinity aspect, the users working with each other, help sustain the model, just like it does for Waze. You get in Waze, all the people are using Waze to guide their vehicles and their routes that they take. There is an interdependence. They all kind of help each other, in a sense, know what the best route is to take. And then you have tapping available inventory and capacity. Amazon's done that. They started out with books. They realized a lot of books are out there, but people can't get to them easily. So they aggregated and they created a network where you could get books delivered to you simply and easily. And then they built off of that books platform into any variety of products you can get today via Amazon. So they're tapping existing capacity and harnessing it to create convenience for users. And Uber has done the same thing. People drive their cars at most 5 or 10% of the time in the day. Well, the rest of that time, if there's an asset available that's not being used. So they used the available inventory of unused vehicles to rationalize and radically change the transport industry. And now traditional cabs and taxis are kind of going away. Expedia has done the same thing with travel. They aggregate and use and find untapped demand or unbooked hotel rooms, make them available to people in a more convenient fashion. So many of these examples are business to consumer types of examples, but these same principles can be applied to B2C businesses as they do B2B. So these are just a few examples of some sort of generic strategies that famous and successful companies have used. And these strategies have, again, been tapped and exploited by many others time and time again. So every business startup has two working marching orders. The first marching order is know your customers. and discover what they want, tap them, talk to them continually. But secondly, then translate that into what's your business model? How do I create a business that can take those undermet needs and build a business around it to make money? So every business that's new, every startup is in the business of discovering what its business model is. That reinforces. So strategy is, again, informed by customer insights, and you translate what those insights tell you into an effective operational reality. That's your business model. And the business model is the means by which you manage all those operating elements, products, programs, customer support, operations, to serve customers and thereby create profits and remain viable. So here's some very simple examples of business models. Microsoft, they're not famous for always having the best products, but their products are good enough. And because they have the platform, as we talked about earlier, they can sell apps. And they'll sell software for $120. It costs them half a dollar to produce. That's pretty nice margins there because they have the platform. So their business model is, we don't have to overspend or overdevelop our products. They'll be good enough and we'll make tremendous margin that supports our continuing development efforts and outreach. Google, you attract a lot of people and then you sell rights to advertise to them. And that's been used time and time again by different online entities. They know more about you. They learn more about the people that use the site. They sell that information to third parties who are in advertising business, and that's how they make money. Wikipedia, you get large groups of people that contribute free content for the right to access others' content, which is kind of amazing. And we all use it. I go there, and if I have something to add, I'll contribute it because I want to borrow from what other people have already done before me, and they just basically monetize that collective crowd behavior. Netflix subscription fee. It's a subscription model that, again, is used often in software before it. But you charge a subscription fee for content-based service, typically entertainment properties. And Zoom, which we're on right now, it's kind of that software as a service freemium model. You give it away, but you also then want to offer it kind of a more basic version, but you hope and try to incent your users to try to upgrade, and you charge for those upgrades. That's a classic strategy that was deployed by lots of software companies historically. Provide a basic product, upsell to a more highly featured version, and charge for that upsell. This is not really an example of a company, this is big data, but many of these companies would use a big data strategy, and that is the data that's generated by my users is now a product, and I can sell that to other people to help them improve their products. So if I've got a medical device and I generate a lot of usage information about that medical device, I can learn a lot about the users, and obviously as long as I'm conforming to HIPAA requirements, I can make that available to other people that produce medical devices to help them create new products of their own or anticipate trends or new types of pharmaceuticals that might be needed and all types of things that might be relevant to the data that I've generated. So I'm in the business of having a platform and maybe even a product or two of my own, but I also want to monetize the data that I gather to make that available to third parties that have an interest in that data. So that's the big data play. And again, I think, as Jay will attest to as well, we have many clients that have a big data play as part of their core strategy, as part of their business model. I not only sell a product or a service or a good, but by the way, the data that it generates is something I can monetize as well. We're seeing more and more of that amongst our client base. So the business model is, you're probably familiar with the 4 Ps. This is kind of the version of that. It's market. What market am I serving? Who are the customers? And that's part of the discovery process. What's the resultant product or products or service and or services? What are people willing to pay? These are all things that we learn about through the discovery process. What's the best way to get products to people? What channels and distribution methods will I use? And what sales organization will I use to support that distribution and selling methodology? And then what does my brand mean? And how do I position my product? How do I communicate with users in a user-friendly way, excuse me, so they'll want to buy my product so I can create demand. So these are all aspects of your business model. Who am I serving? What do they look like? What goods and services do they need? What's good value look like to them? How do I get it to them? And how do I talk to them about it to create demand? Those are the various platforms. So Jay's already gone through the customer discovery, so I won't belabor that, but you really need to know these things. Who are you selling it to? What are their unmet needs? Who really makes the decision and is able to pay? And how do you sustainably offer a competitive advantage to them? Are there patenting possibilities or other intellectual property? The go-to-market strategy, we'll talk a bit more about that, but that's the how. How do you serve them? How do you reach them? How do you serve them? How do you support a customer you already have? What sorts of customer support, tech services? How will you make sure that if a customer has an issue or a question, you can resolve it quickly so they can get on with using your product and creating more revenue and profit for you? And then which partnerships? Are there others that have some of the same interests as yours that don't have conflicting interests where you can craft win-win solutions? Or are there market influencers out there that love to do reviews, product reviews, bloggers that have big networks? It's good to get to know who those people are. You want to get your product to them and have them write a favorable review, because then you'll tap their network and create a lot of demand. So go-to-market considers the people, how you promote, what partnerships make sense, how you serve that market effectively. Now we're going to talk about the business model canvas. This is a tool, and it's a tool that we spend a lot of time on, again, in the Innovar iCore program. There's all these various portions. Now, you can see there's the customer segments on the far right. Who are the customers and what are their needs? And that's the stuff of customer discovery. And then that middle, called value propositions, are what are the products, services that address their undermet and ill-met needs. So that'll be familiar to those who've been through the iCore and Innovar. And then the other elements we'll talk about, but how do you get product to them? How do you support them, et cetera? But this is a tool that's a great way to capture what you've learned as you continue through the continuing customer discovery process. Things you learn should be deposited in these various buckets here, because you coordinate all those things together and translate that into a successful business. So the bright orange and the blue are the portions of the business model canvas that are populated by, or beginning to be populated by, customer discovery. Who are the customers? What do they look like? What are the roles? Who are the decision makers? What amount of influence do they have in usage and purchasing, et cetera, et cetera? And then in the blue box, what's valuable to them? What problems are you solving? And how do you solve those? What do the products look like? What do the services and goods look like? That's that blue box. So again, the business model canvas is where we begin capturing those things. And as you do try to figure out what the value proposition looks like, here's some ways you can think about that. Again, with the customer, what are their wants? Are there emotional reasons? What does success look like? If you're dealing with a purchasing agent, how do they get measured for success? If you can make the various influencers in your customer heroes via your products and solutions, then that's going to help you be more successful with them. Can you make them be afraid of, if you get a foothold with a customer, can you create concern that they don't want to switch from you because they might invite a problem? What are the needs that they have? Are some obvious or some of them hidden? And then get over to on the left side, how your product works or features, but ultimately you want to care about what problems are you solving with what your product does? Those are the benefits. And does the consumer have a good experience using your product? Is it easy to use? Is it user-friendly and intuitive? And then the lower right is when you get into substitutes. Those are some of the competitive alternatives. How can you do things better than your competitors and the incumbents? So this is just another sort of tool, a subset, if you will, of the business model canvas that helps you kind of capture the things you learn through discovery about the customer and the resultant products. So let's talk about go-to-market strategy. Again, these are the types of questions you want to have answered to that. And you want to think of this like a website. You want it to be easy to get into, but once somebody's in, you don't want them to leave. And so it is with your business. You want to minimize friction, make yourself easy to do business with, let somebody want to find out who you are and know more about you. But once they know you, they never want to leave. You want them to fall in love with you and never want to leave you as a supplier. So that's where we say minimize friction and maximize stickiness. So how are you going to sell to them? And again, it depends upon your product, your market, and what the related needs are. There's a combination of online or direct sales, or you can use outside reps or agents. These are independent companies. They aren't employees directly of your company, but they're in the business of representing products and services in a particular industry. Or if you're new to it, and if you're brand new and maybe in a new part of the world that you don't have experience on, you could use agents, sales agents who know the market and know the players and can sort of represent your products at a very high level. So there's a variety of ways in which you can try to address your market through a sales effort, direct, outside, online, and so on. And then you have, even within your own sales organization, we touched upon this earlier, you have account managers who manage today's established accounts. We kind of call them farmers because they're harvesting continually and growing and planting seeds. And then there's the business developers. Business developers are the hunters. I need to go out there and find something new. Where's the new business going to come from? Where are the emerging customer segments or new geographies? And then ultimately the key is, and this is a different model than it was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, under these keys, being likable was most important. Taking somebody to a ball game, buying them lunch. And it's great to be likable, but that's a distant third priority for sales. First and foremost, you got to solve problems. Again, that's the key theme of iCore Innovar. Secondly, be easy to do business with, which makes you more sticky. If you're easy to do business with, they're not going to depart from you. And be likable, but likable is a distant third. You can get by with 1 and 2, even if you're kind of so-so on 3. But if you're banking on being likable and you don't solve problems and you're not easy to do business with, you're not going to get any business nor sustain it. Then how do you support them? What kind of customer service function do you have if there's problems or questions come up? Credit. If there's a credit issue or dispute, how can you be easy to do business with and resolving? What kind of terms do you offer that matter to the customer? Tech support. How you distribute. What's the most convenient way to get products to customers that creates the least amount of drama and issues and challenges on their part? How you create demand and build your brand and your reputation. These are all aspects of go-to-market. And then how do you sustain? Ongoing innovation. Is there intellectual property, patents, and so on? And do you have strategic partnerships that help you tap influencers in their networks? These are all aspects of demand creation for go-to-market strategy. So we get back to the business model canvas. So you can see the orange, the yellow, and the lime green bottle. Those are the subset of the go-to-market strategy, the subset of the business model canvas that address specifically your go-to-market strategy. So customer relations, what kind of sales? What kind of customer service organization do I need? Do I need tech support? Is it inside or does it need to be in the field? These are things you need to talk to customers about to find out where their needs are and what's most user-friendly to them. Channels, what distribution do I use? Activities, how do I build demand? Marketing, what kind of shows do I attend, if any? Resources, what does my brand mean? Do I use a website and how? Do I have patents? And then the key partners. Who are the key opinion leaders and influencers who have large, viable networks of their own that I can tap to create demand? And are there strategic partnerships out there that make sense? So these are some examples of how you populate the business model canvas with what you learned through discovery and through being in the business as you started up that help you then corral all these resources and orchestrate them for a successful business. This chart just kind of shows you a kind of a 10,000-foot view of how these things kind of fit together. So you'll notice that customer discovery, the green arrow at the top, is ongoing. It never ends. And if you learn nothing today, make sure you never forget that. Successful businesses are always and continually doing market discovery, talking to customers and translating what they hear into improvements in the business. Usually at the front end, during the innovation phase, you have innovation and intellectual property you create. That's the blue arrow. And then the go-to-market strategy is how do I then execute on what I've learned to support customers and their needs and questions. So you've got a lot of granular detail. This is actually a real tool that we use within Riverside with our startup businesses. It just gives you kind of a 10,000-foot view of what is the macro of my key activities as I go forward. And if you're talking to potential investors and financial sources, they like to see, show me your high-level plan. What are the milestones along the way? So this gives you sort of a very, very high-level view of milestones that are used. And we deploy this in our own UC Riverside iCore and Innovar program. A lot of detail in here. We won't get into all that today, but this will be available to you in the subsequent deck. The key takeaway, though, as touched upon more than once, is never, ever, ever stop doing discovery. It should be a way of life. It needs to be part of your DNA. Businesses that stop doing this are businesses that get out innovated and get out executed and end up failing. They lose market share. Companies that never stop doing customer discovery translate that into great products and effective services and good communications. And those are the types of businesses that change markets and succeed. And so now we have about 20 minutes or so. 18 minutes or so for related questions. So please feel free, if you have any, to fire away. And if I don't know, I'll deflect it to Jay, because he's forgotten more about this than I know.
Thank you, Steve, for my forgetfulness. So if please feel free just to ask your own questions live. If you don't feel like you have the ability to do that, just put it in the chat and I'll monitor the chat room. But great talk, Steve. There's so much to go over. So before I throw in my 2 cents, I'm going to allow for a couple of moments of silence and let people speak.
Yeah. And I'm going to take the screen share just so I can see what's in chat, if any of the chat comes up. Whoops, I've got to stop my screen share. I can go back to the screen share if we need to, but if you post them in chat, then I'll be able to see. So any questions or observations or anything that especially resonated with you that you'd like to have me and or Jay kind of develop a little bit more fully for you? It was a quick walkthrough, and there's a lot that we covered. The whole history of strategy, innovation, and how that translates into your go-to-market strategy.
Why don't I start with a softball while people
Sure, no worries.
In the age of iPhones and smartphones, how has marketing and go-to-market strategy changed with the sort of instant at your fingertips style of accessing people? And also the flip side of that is now it appears that a lot of companies know a lot about you. How is that impacting their ability to reach out to you? Or if you're a startup, how's that going to impact your ability to reach out to your customers? So it's 2 parts. One is for you, the consumer, and the other for you, the business person. How has these phones,
Yeah.
how phones impacted things?
Certainly, we're in the age of instant gratification, and you saw that touched upon in the history of strategy slide. So people are accustomed to not having any compromises, or if they have them, to having somebody solve them. And again, companies that do that are companies that come up with certain goods and services that they can make money at and have a successful business. So there's that piece of people don't want to experience any compromises. From a product point of view, we also have many clients that tap that existing infrastructure. So I've got clients who are in the medical device business who use a smartphone as their platform and as the display. They can tap into already existing infrastructure and not have to replicate it. And the readout can be from the smartphone with an app that says, here's the diagnostic information you were seeking. So many smart development companies are tapping that infrastructure to not have to replicate it and its cost. Why not use what's already there? With regard to what it means for businesses from a privacy point of view, obviously, it's very important that you let people know that they opt in, so that you don't sell people's information unless they give you permission. And secondly, that you protect that you have security measures in place so that nobody has their private information compromised. Unless you're Google and that's your business, in which case it's sort of understood. If I go to Google or I go to one of these sites that basically gives me a so-called free product, an access or a network, the freeness goes away when the information about me is readily collected and can be available to be sold to others. So there's kind of 2 sides to that. And so consumers need to be wise about, hey, if I'm going there, they're going to learn a lot about me. And that information that they learn a lot about is going to be made available to others who want to sell me products. If you're in a business that uses those sorts of things, businesses that are more progressive will ask permission. Hey, and that's very typical. You have to give them permission or tell them, no, you can't use my information. And so you have to be smart about that as well. I don't know if Jay, if that addresses what you're getting at, or if there's parts of that I perhaps have glossed over with your question.
You answered it very thoroughly, but now I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead, fire away.
Which is, you mentioned Google, and so they're like into everything. And if they're not doing what Amazon is, or Microsoft is, or Facebook is, so that presents a challenge, but an opportunity for entrepreneurs nowadays, because you have to assume that if you've thought of a really good big idea, that one of those players is going to say, we're interested in that too, which means a couple of things. One is it means you've got a competitor that's bigger than you're going to be. And the other is maybe you've got a collaborator. Maybe that's someone who you could cooperate with and you can both win on it. So, so from a marketing point of view and a go-to-market strategy point of view, how do you deal with the fact there's these big monolithic companies that if they put their mind to it could squash you like a bug, but yet they probably haven't because you haven't made it
Yeah.
onto their radar.
Yeah, my default position there usually is to look at a subset of the market that they're not addressing, and that it's too finite and too complicated for them to deal with because they're so big. So you use a bit of a martial arts strategy. So I might pursue a niche that Google hasn't looked at because it's not big enough for them to worry about. Whereas for me as a startup, it may be plenty for me as a platform or as my beachhead. So I kind of go where they're unwilling to go or unable to go. That's the martial arts strategy. Or I might look at and say, I'm going to provide an alternative to Google where the user can know 100% that they'll be secure. Their information will never get out. Can you do a Google play of sorts, but with absolute security? Because it is a compromise to the user that their security could be breached. That's really a compromise. Is there a way that I can look at that compromise and make a business out of that? I don't know the answer to that, but that's a possibility. Is that a platform for innovation, addressing that undermet need of I want to use this service, but I want my privacy to be completely 100% airtight and not available to the public domain.
Yes, what I hear you saying is do something that's either niche, meaning
Yep.
specialized, or it might be so narrow in focus that you could be the Google of something or the Facebook of something,
Right.
So that you have your own space.
Right.
That, they could say, well, we're bigger and better than you're ever going to be, but you'll say, yeah, but in this one particular area,
yeah,
you're not. Like we have this team in our cohort now that is sort of like Airbnb, but it's for storage space. If Airbnb said we want to start renting out storage space, I guess, or renting out apartments or what have you, they could probably, do a better job. They could put 1,000 engineers on it. It'd be done in a minute,
right.
but they haven't. And
Right.
so there is that niche, at least right now, for our startup to do it. And later on, if they start doing $100 million in business, then you know that Airbnb is going to start paying attention to it. But
there's also potentially a vulnerability in Google's strategy, and that is that the security and privacy aspect. So maybe you could provide a secure and private alternative to them, which a subset of the market will be willing to pay for. And Google won't go there because that's their business strategy, is they want to monetize the information they mine from the activity they have with you. So is might that not be a vulnerability in their model that you could try to exploit with a business solution of your own, possibly?
Oh yeah, Google's not about privacy.
No.
I noticed that if I think something, it's going to show up as an ad in Google.
So might that make them vulnerable? So Desiree has a question, or the ladies have a question. Please.
Hi. There's all these steps to take, and I feel like I can visualize a lot of them. Not that I know them well, but I can visualize a lot of it. But our goal is not to be manufacturers and to run factories making our product. What we want to do is have a product, prove that it works,
right,
and then license it to someone else. How far into showing that customers want your product, like how far into do you have to go? Do we have to get a mini factory and sell them for a while?
Well, the further you go, the more valuable you will be if you're whether you're licensing or selling your business. So if you get to the point where you've actually patented it and it's a good idea, you're very valuable at that point. Now, having said that, it's expensive to patent things. It can cost you certainly $20,000 or more, depending upon what you're doing. Or if you're a product that has to get FDA approval, if you've got a medical device or something, the FDA process can be a couple $1 million and 1.5 to 2 years of time. So it depends upon the category and what you have to do to get far along as to how much sense it might make for you. But the further you go, the more valuable you will be. Having said that, the model you described is a licensing model. So I want to be a serial inventor or creator, and I want to get it far enough along that my idea is proven and has credibility, but I don't want to run the business that it will be part of So either sell the idea outright to a third party, that's maybe an incumbent in the category, or license it to several people. But if you can get it to the point where you actually do a startup, or at least you prove the product with traction, you've actually worked through some third party that can translate your idea into a real product. And for a season, they sell it, and you can see that it actually works and that people love it and they want more of it. If you get to at least to that far, then you're more valuable when you try to license it to a big player or maybe sell the business outright. And you can use many of our clients will use outside contracted manufacturing that you don't own. It's a third party that is in the business of an engineering house that designs products and can get them sourced and can do all the quality that you need, quality inspections you need, et cetera. But you don't actually own any of those resources. That's a way to go too. And in that case, your aim there is to get the product far enough along that I prove it, that I know that demand is there, and ultimately that I can make it thereby more valuable when I license or sell it outright to somebody else. And that, again, that's the serial inventor or serial creator maker model. And that's a very viable model that many use.
Thank you.
You could become a subject matter expert in that domain and maybe I've got 18 ideas that are all in the same similar space, but they're different from one another. And I'm going to work on 1 or 2 or 3 of them at a time. And as I get them done, I spin them out in licensing deals, or I have them produced by somebody until I prove them, and then I license or sell that to somebody else. That's a very viable model that several of our clients have used. Does that get at your question?
Yes, that's, you know what, I think because we've learned about so many different steps in building a startup, that when it got to the manufacturing part, it just got real foggy for me.
Yeah.
I thought, how far into this are we gonna?
Yeah, but you're right. The complexity of manufacturing something and distributing it yourself, there's layers of complexity that come in with that. And again, if you're an entrepreneur that wants to do a startup business and take it on, and indefinitely, that's okay. You can bring people in that have that expertise and staff up accordingly. Or you can say, you know what, I'm really about the product and about the customer, and I'm okay with putting my child up for adoption, if you will, whether it be a licensing deal or selling outright, and that's okay too. It just depends on what the owner and founder's vision is and what kind of strategy and exit strategy specifically they have in mind.
That's the word I was looking for, exit strategy.
Yeah.
That was it.
And you'll hear that talked about again in ICOR and in Innovar, because we talk about what's the aspiration of the owner, the originator, and what's a good exit for them. Is the exit, I want to start a business up, in which case I move from an idea to a new business. Is my exit, I license? Is my exit that I sell it outright? Or, those are in 3 different flavors of exit strategies, each of which could be very viable depending upon the product and upon the aspirations of the originator.
Can I ask you a little bit of a follow-up? So when we're going into this right now, you keep your exit strategy open. If you don't know, or if you're going to have some manufacturing, we shouldn't have really our exit strategy right now.
Well, as you get further along in discovery, you'll hear from people what it takes to satisfy their needs. Mm-hmm. And then that will then help dictate what strategy makes sense for you. What do you have an appetite for based upon what those needs are? And so it's very particular to you, and it's very particular to the segment. I think, Karis, am I pronouncing your name correctly? I think you have a question as well.
Yeah, my name's Karis.
Karis, thank you.
Yeah, my question's really just pretty general.
Okay.
Your presentation really primed me on a lot of things that I wasn't aware of. Kind of all of these different avenues of entrepreneurship. And I was wondering if there's further reading materials or other things, or is this just all from your practical experience?
Well, it is practical, but we have found the best avenue is to get involved with, again, the Innovar curriculum at UC Riverside, which Jay personally heads up. Mm-hmm. And it's a 7-week process. And the ladies Tamir in your upper left are part of it as we speak. And I think maybe, I don't know, I think Dunway also is involved, if I'm not mistaken, the current Innovar curriculum, the cohort. But you learn through that how to translate, how to do market discovery, and how to translate that into a business model, and how then in turn that goes forward. And Jay's just pasted into the chat that there's steveblank.com. There's a whole bunch of tools and resources there that can help you with the discovery process, and then how do you apply that going forward into a successful business. And so there's a whole rich area there that's that you can mine if you're able to take the time and kind of dig more deeply. So we've given you kind of whirlwind tour today that gives you a flavor of it.
Yeah.
but there's more to come. And again, the curriculum that Jay heads up at Riverside is an example of the iCourse/Innovar program is all about discovery. And then how does that set you up? How does that get you ready for the front end of a successful strategy and go-to-market strategy and a basis for a business, whether you license it, start up and making it yourself, or sell it outright to a third party. Is there another question in chat? Yeah, sure. Hope that helps. Again, look for steveblank.com as Jay pasted that into chat.
Yeah.
Got a few more minutes here. Other question? Any last question or that I can try to address?
Let me remind everyone, but especially Karis, and she's here, that we have 3 more sessions where you can learn a lot more and learn things that you might not have thought about. Next week, we have the lawyers speaking about company formation and intellectual property. And in 2 weeks, we have the early growth financial services speaking about how to keep good records, good bookkeeping, good accounting, and all the way through how do you make yourself ready for and organized as such to receive funding. And then we've talked a little bit about the social media stuff that's sort of revolutionizing the way people interact. And we have a social media expert from UCR speaking in 3 weeks. So we still have another minute or two for questions. And Steve, you did an excellent answer on the exit strategy. I like to think it's you almost need to have your exit strategy from the beginning, and it's modified by what you find out.
Sure.
And one of the things you will find out is if you're trying to sell, you're always ready to sell a little bit sooner than someone's willing to buy.
Sure.
And
yeah.
so, that's just the way the world works. They want you to have it all ready, all done,
sure,
proven. And of course, you want to say, "I've got this great idea. Why don't you just, pay me $1 million?"
And the fuel and the oxygen for that exit strategy is what are the aspirations and needs of the founder? You may say, "Hey, I have to have my own business. I've been ready, preparing my whole life for that, and I want to make stuff," and that's great. Or you may say, "I just like making things. I'll let somebody else deal with the other headaches," and that's okay too. I think we talked about with Desiree. That's the strategy where you license it, perhaps. But the further you can get it, which could be even including getting it patented, the more you invest in it, the further down that road you get, the more valuable you are to a third party, because the more proven your idea.
Okay, Steve. Thank you very much.
Sure.
If there's any other last minute questions, I think we've.
And Jay, will you email those to people or post it? I want to obviously you can all get access to this because we went through this fairly quickly.
We have a YouTube account that I'm gonna post it to once the recording's over.
Perfect. Thank you, Margarita. So everybody will get a link to that. Excellent.
Well, not necessarily a link, but you can look it up for sure on YouTube under Office of Technology and Partnership. And you could look on there and it should be open to the public, even to people who didn't come, or if there's anyone you think who could benefit from it, but aren't part of the UCR system or UCR staff or anything, you could definitely lead them to that page and they'll be able to get the same information.
Had I known it would be this public, I would have probably said a few things that were more responsible than I did, but I'll have to watch myself in the future. This is out for the whole world to see now. So I've got to behave myself more in the future. But I hope you found this. I hope all of you found this useful. It kind of gives you a little bit of a flavor and a taste. Hopefully it stirs your thoughts and has some wheels turning. And again, as Jay will reinforce, discovery never ends. Successful businesses never stop discovering about their customers.
Correct. The key is successful.
Right.
Or you can be Sears Roebuck.
Yeah. Go the way of the buggy whip. Nobody wants to do that. So. Well, thank you so much for joining today and for your attention and your great questions. I hope again you found it useful. And Jay and I are available to you, as are as the other mentors at UC Riverside, should there be subsequent questions or themes that you want to explore more deeply.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Have a good rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you next week.
See ya. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.